The auditorium was a cauldron of anticipation, its cavernous expanse filled with a vibrant crowd clutching signs that shimmered under the blazing stage lights. Messages like "Johnny, our Pirate King," and "Forever our Muse" floated above a sea of faces, their bold colors a testament to the fervor gripping the room. The set, a masterful blend of sleek modernity and cinematic warmth, pulsed with the quiet efficiency of a well-choreographed performance. Cameras glided silently on their tracks. Crew members darted through the shadows, and monitors scattered across the space flashed a silent countdown, each second ticking closer to the night's main event. The heavy velvet curtains framing the stage seemed to hum with expectation, their deep burgundy folds catching the golden glow of spotlights that bathed the scene in an almost sacred aura. Then he appeared. Johnny Depp stepped onto the stage, his stride deliberate yet relaxed, exuding a charisma that was both enigmatic and approachable. He wore a weathered leather jacket, its edges frayed from years of stories untold. Paired with a loose scarf that hung carelessly around his neck, a nod to his bohemian soul. Faded jeans clung to his frame, their worn patches telling tales of late-night guitar sessions and quiet moments away from the spotlight. Scuffed boots completed the ensemble, grounding him in a world that often tried to elevate him beyond reach. His dark hair, streaked with silver, fell just past his shoulders, and a pair of tinted glasses rested low on his nose, framing eyes that held a mix of mischief, melancholy, and hard-earned wisdom. The audience erupted, a tidal wave of applause and cheers crashing through the auditorium. Some shouted his name, their voices raw with adoration. Others simply stared, captivated by the quiet intensity that seemed to radiate from him like a low, steady flame. Johnny raised a hand, a subtle gesture of gratitude, before settling into the central chair with a lopsided smile that felt like an invitation to share in his world. Across from him sat Vanessa Cross, a journalist whose name was synonymous with incisive, often ruthless interviews. Her talk show, Crossfire, was a cultural juggernaut, a platform where reputations were tested, vulnerabilities exposed, and uncomfortable truths laid bare. Tonight, Vanessa was a vision of calculated precision. Her fitted blazer accentuated her sharp posture, its crisp lines a stark contrast to Johnny's weathered attire. Her hair was pulled back into a severe bun, each strand meticulously in place, a symbol of her unyielding control. She gripped a stack of question cards with a firmness that suggested they were both weapon and shield, her fingers steady as if ready to wield them with surgical precision. Her lips curved into a smile, professional yet predatory, as her eyes locked onto Johnny, studying him as if he were a puzzle to be solved, a code to be cracked. The audience, expecting another of Johnny's famously introspective and inspiring interviews, leaned forward, unaware that Vanessa had no interest in inspiration. She wanted to provoke, to challenge, to strip away the layers of the actor's enigmatic persona and expose the raw, vulnerable core beneath. This was not to be a conversation. It was to be a duel. The stage lights dimmed slightly, casting a focused glow on the two figures at the center of the set, their silhouettes framed against a shimmering backdrop. Vanessa leaned forward, her voice slicing to the hum of anticipation like a blade through silk. "Johnny, you've got fame, fortune, a career that spanned decades. You could live like royalty, surrounded by luxury, yet you're out there painting in your studio, jamming with obscure bands, and dodging the red carpet. Does any of that actually make a difference in the world? Or is it just a quirky hobby to keep you from getting bored?" The question landed with a sting, its dismissive tone catching the audience off guard. Murmurs rippled through the crowd, some frowning at the provocation, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. It was a jab meant to undermine, to paint Johnny's passions as frivolous in a world that demanded grandeur. Johnny, however, remained unfazed. He tilted his head, his fingers brushing the edge of his scarf as he considered her words, his tinted glasses catching the light in a way that made his eyes seem to flicker with quiet amusement. After a moment, he met her gaze, his voice low and deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who had seen both the heights of adulation and the depths of despair. "Vanessa, have you ever thought about how many people wake up feeling like they don't exist? Like they're just shadows moving through someone else's story? If one thing I do, a film, a song, even just sitting down to listen, makes them feel seen for a moment, then yeah, it makes a difference. Maybe not to the headlines or the history books, but to them, and that's enough for me. The studio fell silent, the weight of his words settling over the crowd like a gentle tide washing over a restless shore. A few audience members exchanged glances, their expressions softening as they absorbed the quiet power of his response. A woman in the second row clutched her sign tighter, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. Another fan, a young man with a tattoo of a sparrow on his wrist, nodded slowly, as if Johnny had spoken directly to a part of him long buried. Vanessa raised an eyebrow, caught off guard by how effortlessly Johnny had deflected her provocation, turning her challenge into a moment of profound simplicity. She hadn't expected him to sidestep her trap so deftly, and for a fleeting moment, her sharp smile wavered, a crack in her carefully constructed armor. But Vanessa Cross was not one to be outmaneuvered. Flipping to the next card with a deliberate flick of her wrist, she leaned in, her eyes glinting with a ruthless intent. She had a sharper question, one designed to pierce the armor of Johnny Depp's carefully guarded soul, to draw blood where words alone had failed. The air in the studio grew tense, the energy shifting as Vanessa adjusted her posture, her movements calculated and precise, like a chess player positioning her pieces for a checkmate. She tossed the next card onto the table, letting the suspense build like a storm gathering on the horizon, its dark clouds promising chaos. Then, with a voice that carried a cold, almost surgical edge, she struck. "Johnny, you've been through the ringer. Public scandals that dominated headlines, a brutal divorce that played out like a soap opera, the loss of close friends who meant the world to you. Didn't that destroy you? Don't you ever feel like life is just one long string of pain, no matter how many canvases you paint or guitars you strum?" The question landed like a thunderclap, its brutality sucking the air from the room. The audience gasped, some covering their mouths in shock, others frowning at the invasive cruelty of the inquiry. It was a low blow, a deliberate jab at the most painful chapters of Johnny's life, his highly publicized legal battles, the death of friends like Hunter S. Thompson, the personal losses that had left scars only he could see. The camera zoomed in, capturing the subtle shift in his expression. He lowered his head, his fingers interlocking over his knees, the tinted glasses slipping slightly down his nose to reveal a glimpse of eyes that held an ocean of memories. For a moment, the studio was so quiet you could hear the faint hum of the stage lights, their electric but was the only sound in a space suspended in time. Vanessa watched him closely, her eyes narrowing as she waited for a crack, a flicker of vulnerability she could exploit, a moment of weakness that would prove her dominance in this carefully orchestrated battle. But Johnny didn't crumble. He took a deep breath, his shoulders rising and falling, as if releasing a weight that had pressed against him for years. When he lifted his gaze, his eyes met Vanessa's, and there was something in them. Sorrow, yes, but also a quiet resilience that seemed to glow like an ember in the dark, unyielding even in the face of a storm. "Pain doesn't destroy you unless you let it, Vanessa," he said, his voice steady yet laced with a raw, unguarded emotion that seemed to resonate with every heart in the room. "It's a teacher, not a tyrant. It shows you what matters, every fleeting moment, every connection, every time you choose to keep going. Love, real love, doesn't vanish, even when the person does. It stays with you, like a melody you can't forget, guiding you through the dark." The silence that followed was profound, a sacred hush that enveloped the studio like a prayer. A woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, her hands trembling as she tried to compose herself. A man in the back row leaned forward, his face a mix of awe and empathy, his own memories of loss stirred by Johnny's words. Even those unfamiliar with his personal struggles felt the weight of his response, its sincerity cutting through the artifice of the talk show format like a blade through silk. Vanessa, for the first time, seemed rattled. Her sharp smile faltered, replaced by a fleeting look of surprise, perhaps even regret. She hadn't anticipated this, hadn't expected Johnny to transform her attack into a universal truth that resonated with every soul in the room, from the teenagers clutching their signs to the retirees who had followed his career since 21 Jump Street. But she was a seasoned journalist, and she quickly regained her composure, straightening her shoulders and sliding her fingers over the question cards. She wasn't ready to concede. Not yet. The studio still buzzed with the aftershock of Johnny's words, the audience caught in a reverie of reflection, their earlier excitement tempered by a deeper, more contemplative mood. But Vanessa had no intention of letting the moment linger, of allowing Johnny to hold the stage with his quiet wisdom. She flipped through her cards, her movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring the tension that hung in the air like a taut wire. Her next question was already locked in her mind, a calculated strike aimed at Johnny's relevance in an industry that worshipped youth, beauty, and novelty. Leaning forward, her tone softer but no less cutting, she asked, "Johnny, you're in your 60s now. Hollywood's a young man's game, always chasing the next big thing, the next shiny star. Don't you worry about fading into obscurity, becoming just another name in the credits, forgotten by the machine that made you." The audience reacted instantly, whispers of disbelief rippling through the crowd like a sudden breeze. It was a blunt question, one that bordered on cruel, implying that Johnny's time in the spotlight was nearing its end, that his legacy was at risk of being swept away by the relentless tide of time. The cameras panned across the audience, catching furrowed brows, clenched hands, and a few defiant shakes of the head from fans who refused to entertain the notion. Johnny didn't respond right away. He rubbed his fingers together, his gaze drifting as if he were somewhere else entirely, perhaps a memory of a younger self navigating the treacherous waters of fame in the 80s, or a quiet moment in his studio, paintbrush in hand, creating something no critic could take away. Vanessa, sensing the pause, allowed herself a small, triumphant smile, her eyes gleaming with the belief that she'd finally found his weak spot, the chink in his armor where doubt might seep through. Then Johnny looked up, his eyes locking onto hers with clarity that seemed to cut through the noise of the studio, through the lights and the cameras and the expectations. "Vanessa, have you ever watched The Star Twilight?" The audience stirred, puzzled by the cryptic response, their murmurs a soft undercurrent to his words. He continued, his voice soft but resonant, each word chosen with the care of an artist crafting a masterpiece. "It's not as bright as the sun, not as loud as the dawn, but it's steady, constant. It doesn't need to compete with the day to matter. It just is. Relevance isn't about being the loudest voice in the room. Vanessa, it's about saying something worth hearing, something that lingers long after the lights go out." The studio erupted in applause, shouts of "Yes, Johnny," and "You're a legend," echoing through the space like a rallying cry. A young woman in the third row stood, clapping fiercely, her eyes bright with admiration, her hands trembling with the intensity of the moment. An older man in the balcony, his face lined with years, nodded solemnly, as if Johnny had given voice to a truth he'd carried for decades. Vanessa froze, her carefully rehearsed smile vanishing, her composure shattered by the sheer force of his response. For the first time, she'd lost control of the interview. Johnny hadn't just answered her question. He'd dismantled it, turned her trap into a moment of quiet brilliance that left the audience spellbound, their hearts alight with a renewed sense of awe. The cameras caught the shift in her expression, a mix of shock and reluctant admiration, her eyes betraying a flicker of something she hadn't expected to feel, respect. She took a deep breath, glancing at her cards, realizing she needed a new approach. Her plan to unsettle Johnny was unraveling, thread by thread, but she wasn't out of moves yet. The energy in the studio shifted, the audience now hanging on Johnny's every word, as if he were weaving a tapestry of wisdom they hadn't expected to find in the glitz of a talk show. Vanessa, sensing the tide turning against her, decided to dig deeper, to probe a wound she believed would finally shake him. She picked up the next card, holding it for a moment as if weighing its impact, her fingers tracing the edges with deliberateness that belied her growing frustration. Then, with a voice that was both firm and icy, she asked, "Johnny, you grew up with a tough childhood, absent parents, constant moving, scraping by in trailer parks in small towns. Didn't that leave you angry? Don't you carry that resentment, even now, beneath all the art and the charm?" The question hit hard, and the audience shifted uncomfortably, their earlier enthusiasm tempered by the weight of the inquiry. It was another attempt to expose a raw nerve, to drag Johnny back to a past marked by instability, uncertainty, and the ache of a childhood spent searching for roots in a world that offered none. The camera zoomed in, capturing the subtle tilt of his head, the way his fingers brushed the edge of his glasses as he considered the question, his expression unreadable behind the tinted lenses. For a moment he didn't speak, his gaze drifting as if revisiting the faded Polaroids of his youth. Kentucky summers, single-parent hustle, the sound of his mother's laughter mingling with the weight of her exhaustion. Then he smiled, a small, wistful smile that seemed to carry a lifetime of memories, each one a brushstroke on the canvas of who he had become. "My childhood wasn't easy, Vanessa," he said, his voice soft but steady, each word imbued with a quiet strength. "It was rough, yeah, moving from place to place, never quite knowing where home was. But it gave me something. It taught me how to find family in the people around me, how to create my own home wherever I am, whether the trailer park or movie set. Anger? Sure, I felt it like anyone would, but I learned early on that holding on to it is like carrying a weight that only slows you down. You let it go and you find freedom, freedom to create, to love, to live." The studio was silent, save for a few quiet sobs from the audience, their emotions spilling over in the wake of his words. A man in the back row wiped his eyes, his face a mix of awe and empathy, his own memories of struggle stirred by Johnny's honesty. A woman in the fourth row clutched her partner's hand, her lips trembling as she nodded in silent agreement, her heart touched by the simplicity and depth of his response. Vanessa hesitated, her fingers tightening around the cards, her knuckles whitening under the pressure. She hadn't anticipated this. Johnny's ability to transform her attacks into moments of universal truth that resonated with every soul in the room, from the starry-eyed fans to the skeptics who had come expecting a spectacle. For the first time, she felt the interview slipping entirely from her grasp. Her show was built on exposing weakness, on breaking her guests until they revealed their flaws. But Johnny refused to be broken. Instead, he was turning her questions into lessons, her provocations into poetry, her battlefield into a sanctuary. But Vanessa wasn't done. There was one final card to play. One question she believed would finally break through his calm exterior, would finally force him to confront a fear no one could escape. The air in the studio was electric, charged with an unspoken energy that transcended the typical talk show dynamic, as if the room itself were holding its breath. Johnny had faced every question with quiet strength, turning Vanessa's provocations into reflections that left the audience in awe, their hearts open and their minds alight. But Vanessa Cross was not one to surrender. She had built her career on pushing boundaries, on finding the crack in even the most composed guest facade, and she wasn't about to let Johnny redefine the rules of her game. Adjusting her blazer, she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a near whisper, its tone laced with chilling intimacy that sent a shiver through the room. "Johnny, don't you ever fear death? Time spares no one, not even legends. What happens when your time runs out? When the curtain falls for good?" The question hung in the air, heavy and inescapable, a shadow cast over the bright lights of the studio, a specter that loomed over every life, no matter how celebrated. The audience held its breath, the weight of mortality settling over the room like a fog, thick and unyielding. This was no longer about Hollywood or fame, about box office numbers or critical acclaim. It was about the human condition, the one truth no one could outrun, no matter how many awards lined their shelves. Johnny tilted his head, his expression unreadable, the tinted glasses hiding the flicker in his eyes, though the faintest tightening of his jaw betrayed a moment of contemplation. The silence stretched, each second feeling like an eternity, the tension so palpable it seemed the air itself might crack. Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing, certain she finally found the chink in his armor, the question that would unravel him, would expose the fear she believed lurked beneath his calm exterior. Then he spoke, his voice calm but piercing, each word a brushstroke on a canvas of truth, painted with the steady hand of someone who had faced the abyss and chosen to create anyway. "Vanessa, fear and courage aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin, turning over and over in every life. I don't fear death because I've learned to live with it every day, not as an enemy, but as a reminder. It's not about how long you're here. It's about what you leave behind. A painting, a song, a moment that makes someone else's life a little brighter, a little less lonely. That's what outlasts you, what carries your name beyond the grave." Vanessa blinked, caught off guard, her breath catching in her throat. She had expected hesitation, perhaps a vague platitude or immediate trained deflection to smooth over the discomfort. Instead, Johnny had turned her question into a meditation on life itself, a quiet defiance of fear she tried to weaponize, a beacon of light in the shadows she cast. The audience sat in stunned silence, some wiping away tears, others nodding as if his words had unlocked something deep within them, a truth they hadn't known they needed until this moment. A young man in the fifth row clutched his program, his eyes wide with realization, as if Johnny had handed him a map to navigate his own fears. A grandmother in the balcony, her hands folded in her lap, smiled softly, her heart warmed by the wisdom of a man who had lived through storms and still chose to shine. Vanessa's lips parted, but no words came. For the first time, she had no rebuttal, no counterattack, no sharp retort to regain her footing. Her carefully curated question cards, once her arsenal, felt irrelevant, their words hollow in the face of Johnny's truth. Her entire strategy, meticulously planned to unsettle him, to expose him, had been undone by a man who refused to play by her rules, who refused to be reduced to a soundbite or a scandal. The studio remained hushed, the weight of Johnny's words lingering like a melody that refused to fade, its notes echoing in the hearts of everyone present. Vanessa, desperate to reclaim control, flipped to her final card, her fingers trembling slightly, betraying the turmoil beneath her polished exterior. Her voice was softer now, almost vulnerable, as if she were stepping into uncharted territory, her armor cracked by the man sitting across from her. "And what if no one remembers you when you're gone?" she asked, her words barely above a whisper, each syllable heavy with the weight of a fear she hadn't meant to reveal. It was the ultimate question, designed to expose the fear of insignificance that haunts every public figure, every artist, every human who dares to dream of leaving a mark on the world. The audience leaned forward, the silence so profound it seemed the world had stopped, time itself holding its breath. Johnny didn't answer immediately. He smiled, a gentle, knowing smile that seemed to see beyond the studio, beyond the cameras, beyond the moment itself, as if he were peering into a truth the rest of the room could only glimpse. For a moment, he looked almost otherworldly, a poet in a leather jacket, a soul who had danced with darkness and chosen light. "The question isn't what they'll remember about me," he said, his voice steady, each word a quiet thunder that rolled through the auditorium. "The question is, what will they remember about you?" A ripple of gasps swept through the audience, soft but electric, like a current passing from heart to heart. Vanessa froze, her hands tightening around the cards until the edges crumpled under her grip, her knuckles white with the force of her restraint. For the first time, she was the one under scrutiny, her carefully constructed persona laid bare, her fortress of confidence breached by a single, piercing question. The cameras zoomed in, capturing the subtle shift in her expression, a flicker of shock, a glimmer of vulnerability, a crack in the facade she had spent years perfecting. A single tear slipped down her cheek, unnoticed by her but immortalized by the lenses, a silent testament to the impact of Johnny's words. She didn't wipe it away, didn't move, didn't speak. The audience watched transfixed as the woman who had built a career on exposing others found herself exposed, not by cruelty, not by malice, but by a truth so pure it cut through her defenses like light through shadow, illuminating the parts of her she had long kept hidden. Johnny stood, his movements slow and deliberate, the leather jacket creaking faintly as he rose, the scarf trailing behind him like a flag of quiet rebellion. The applause began softly, a gentle wave that grew into a thunderous ovation, shaking the rafters of the auditorium, a chorus of gratitude and awe that seemed to lift the very air. But he didn't bask in it, didn't linger to soak up the adoration. He simply nodded, his eyes scanning the crowd with quiet gratitude, a man who had shared a piece of his soul and asked for nothing in return. Then he walked off the stage, his boots echoing faintly in the vast space, his silhouette fading into shadows, as if he were a ghost who had appeared only to leave the world a little brighter. Vanessa remained seated, her cards abandoned on the table, their edges curling slightly under the heat of the lights, their words now meaningless in the wake of what had transpired. The cameras lingered on her face, capturing the subtle shift in her expression, a mix of awe, regret, and something profoundly human, a glimpse of the woman beneath the journalist, the soul beneath the armor. For years, she had built her career on sharp words, relentless questions, and an unwavering belief that exposing others made her powerful. That control was her legacy. Now, for the first time, she wondered what her own legacy would be, what mark she would leave on a world that remembered not her victories, but her choices. The screen faded to black, and a final message appeared in simple white text, its words glowing against the darkness. Life is not about how long we live, but the impact we leave behind. Soft, reflective music played, a gentle piano melody that seemed to echo the weight of the moment, its notes weaving a tapestry of hope and introspection. The video ended, leaving the audience, both in the studio and at home, changed by what they had witnessed. Their hearts stirred, their minds opened, their souls touched by a man who had turned a battlefield into a sanctuary, a talk show into a sermon, a moment into a memory that would linger long after the lights went out.